She slipped into the ballroom 10 minutes late, her emerald dress catching the light like it had a life of its own. The music swelled around her, soft jazz weaving through crystal chandeliers. But all Ethan Pierce could hear was the quiet rhythm of his own heartbeat. He'd come expecting small talk and polite smiles, a mandatory nod to friendship and decorum. Yet something in that moment felt like an avalanche he couldn't stop. Clara Whitman moved as if the room existed only to highlight her, yet there was a tremor in her hand as she adjusted her bracelet, a fleeting doubt that made her reel. Ethan watched, fascinated, realizing instantly that she was unlike anyone he'd ever met. There was grace, yes, but beneath it, a vulnerability that whispered of loss, of stories untold, and yet she smiled gently at a child who dropped his cupcake, bending down as if it were the most natural thing in the world to care. In that instant, a strange calm settled over him, tinged with electricity, a question he couldn't ignore. Could someone this fleetingly beautiful, this quietly brave, really exist in his world, or was he about to lose himself chasing an impossible heart? If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The golden light of late afternoon poured through the towering windows of the ballroom, painting the polished wooden floor in long, warm streaks. Ethan Pierce adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit and ran a hand through his darkening hair, feeling the familiar knot of unease settle in his stomach. He had built steel and concrete empires across Chicago, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, and navigated boardrooms with unwavering confidence. Yet here, among the softly chattering guests and delicate aroma of fresh-cut roses, he felt conspicuously out of place. It wasn't the grandeur that unsettled him. The room was magnificent high ceilings draped with delicate crystal chandeliers, pale cream walls adorned with elegant sconces, and soft classical music curling around each conversation like invisible threads. It was the kind of perfection he could usually analyze and admire, calculating every detail, but tonight, perfection only made him feel even more conspicuous. Every laugh, every gesture, every clink of a glass seemed to underscore his own disconnection. He scanned the crowd with the same meticulous eye he applied to construction plans, noticing the angles of the tables, the symmetry of the floral arrangements, the way sunlight caught the polished surfaces. And yet, even as he cataloged the physical beauty of the space, he felt no pull, no spark, only the persistent hum of detachment and the ghostly echo of his own solitary heart. A sudden shift in the atmosphere made him pause. The double doors at the far end of the hall creaked open, and a ripple of attention moved through the guests. Heads turned, conversations faltered, and somewhere deep inside, Ethan felt a peculiar tightening in his chest, a jolt that had nothing to do with logic or calculation. Clara Whitman entered. She moved with a grace that was impossible to ignore, her emerald gown catching the last rays of sunlight and reflecting them in soft, flickering patterns. The dress hugged her in all the right places, flowing elegantly where it needed to, revealing just enough to hint at a presence both confident and unassuming. Her hair, chestnut brown with natural highlights, fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the light like a cascade of subtle gold threads. Ethan's pulse, normally slow and controlled, jumped unpredictably. He had seen people enter rooms, of course. He had seen confidence, charm, beauty, but nothing like this. Clara's presence was magnetic, not in a loud or flamboyant way, but with the kind of effortless authority that commands attention simply by existing. She paused briefly, as though acknowledging her tardiness, and offered a small, apologetic smile to the nearest guests. But when her gaze shifted across the room and landed on Ethan, the world seemed to constrict around that single point. Time slowed. The soft music dimmed. The laughter became a distant murmur. His analytical mind, honed over decades, faltered entirely. Electricity sparked between them, instantaneous and inexplicable. Ethan felt a calm he hadn't known in years, mixed with a jolt of awareness that made his chest tighten pleasantly, alarmingly. His breath caught. 1 heartbeat, 2. He wanted to look away, to ground himself, but he couldn't. He couldn't blink. She was there, fully present, fully herself, and somehow she had found the way to see him too, even through the walls he'd meticulously built around himself. The guests continued to move, chatting and smiling, but Ethan was frozen, caught in the gravity of a gaze that seemed to hold both invitation and challenge. Clara's eyes, a shade of gray-green that flickered like early morning light over the lake, were steady, curious, and luminous. A subtle quirk at the corner of her lips suggested amusement, or perhaps a secret she hadn't yet revealed. He realized he was aware of every movement, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the delicate arc of her hand brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the rhythm of her breathing in the moment before she crossed the room. Each detail burned into his consciousness, leaving a trace of awe he couldn't explain. Ethan's rational side screamed at him to analyze, to control, to retreat. But another part, deeper, quieter, something he hadn't named in years, urged him forward. He wanted to step closer, to speak, to bridge the invisible gap that had sprung up in that fraction of a second. Yet he remained seated, paralyzed by the impossible beauty of the moment and the knowledge that some encounters are not merely chance, they are transformations waiting to happen. Clara's gaze lingered for a heartbeat longer than social etiquette would allow. Then, with the faintest tilt of her head and a quiet smile that seemed to say, "Yes, I know the effect I have," she continued walking, the hem of her gown sweeping across the floor with effortless elegance. Ethan exhaled, almost in disbelief. His hands, still resting lightly on his knees, had unconsciously curled into fists. For the first time in decades, he felt awake, intensely, urgently alive. The world he had meticulously constructed around himself, the control, the schedules, the predictable outcomes seemed to vanish in the space of a glance. Something fragile yet profoundly potent had ignited, a spark neither of them could yet name, but both could feel. The music swelled, a delicate violin solo threading through the hall, but Ethan barely heard it. His attention clung to her like gravity, suspended in anticipation, charged with a silent promise he did not yet understand. And in that brief, almost imperceptible moment, the seed of something extraordinary was planted, a connection that would challenge, inspire, and transform him in ways he could scarcely imagine. He didn't know what would happen next. He only knew that he had to see her again, that the world had shifted in a way he hadn't anticipated. And as Clara moved gracefully toward the center of the room, leaving a trail of subtle fragrance and quiet authority behind, Ethan realized with a thrill that the night, and perhaps his life, had just changed forever. The soft murmur of conversation swirled through the ballroom like smoke, curling and twisting around the edges of Ethan Pierce's awareness. He remained seated in the third row, inconspicuous in his dark suit, yet utterly absorbed. Clara Whitman had taken her place among the other bridesmaids, yet she didn't merely blend in. She illuminated the space around her with quiet, unassuming vitality. Ethan's gaze followed her as she moved with deliberate grace, adjusting the folds of her emerald gown with a subtle attention to detail that made the movement appear effortless. There was a fleeting vulnerability in the way she checked her watch, a slight hesitation that betrayed a nervousness she didn't fully hide. She exhaled softly, and with the faintest upward tilt of her lips, offered a whispered apology to those nearby. It was not the exaggerated apology of a woman flustered for effect, but the honest, human acknowledgement of imperfection, a quality Ethan rarely witnessed in a room built on appearances and etiquette. The ballroom itself seemed to recede around him. Light filtered in from the glass ceiling above, painting the polished floors with ethereal rays that danced across the mirrored walls. Hanging crystal pendants scattered the light into delicate fragments, and soft jazz melodies floated from a discreet ensemble tucked near the back of the room, their tones warm and understated. Every detail was technically perfect, the type of carefully orchestrated beauty Ethan was accustomed to overseeing in his skyscraper projects. Yet it all felt hollow compared to the subtle life unfolding before him. Clara knelt briefly beside a small child who had wandered from his parents' table. Her hands rested lightly on the boy's shoulders as she offered him a gentle, coaxing smile. "It's okay. You can stay here," she murmured, and the child's tense shoulders relaxed, a timid smile returning to his face. The gesture was fleeting, almost casual, but it revealed a humanity that resonated deep within Ethan, stirring something long dormant, a recognition that some forms of strength are invisible, yet profoundly felt. He noticed her small movements, the way she tilted her head slightly when listening to another bridesmaid, the soft exhalation as she absorbed a compliment without vanity, the barely perceptible crinkle at the corner of her eyes when something amused her internally. These details, insignificant to most, painted a portrait of someone intricate, someone with layers that were both guarded and deeply alive. Ethan felt a quiet longing coil inside him. He was a man trained to assess, to calculate, to maintain a deliberate distance. Yet Clara's presence made all that expertise seem trivial. He couldn't measure her, couldn't predict her, couldn't reduce her to a neat category of beauty or charm. She was a puzzle he hadn't anticipated, encountering a mystery whose pieces were arranged with subtle care and unexpected warmth. A string of laughter echoed near the far end of the room. Clara's attention shifted momentarily, her eyes scanning the guests as she offered a small, reassuring smile to someone whose anxiety was evident in a nervous hand gesture. Ethan observed, fascinated, as her compassion seemed instinctive, yet unpretentious, as though kindness was a reflex rather than a conscious choice. He realized that she had an effortless ability to perceive what others needed without demanding recognition, in return a stark contrast to the calculated interactions that filled his own life. He leaned back slightly, attempting to reconcile the fluttering tension in his chest with his methodical mind. He understood, intellectually, that he was reacting to attraction, to novelty, to the thrill of unexpected beauty. But what gripped him so insistently was not merely her appearance, it was the depth hinted at in those small, humane gestures. Every glance, every fleeting smile, every carefully measured movement whispered stories of resilience, sensitivity, and unspoken histories that he ached to know. The pianist shifted to a softer melody, one that seemed to wrap the room in a quiet intimacy. Clara's eyes lifted briefly, catching a slant of sunlight from the glass above, and for a suspended moment, Ethan imagined he could see the countless experiences etched into her gaze, the triumphs, the disappointments, the quiet victories that had sculpted her. He realized with a jolt that she was not merely late to the wedding, she was late to his perception, late in revealing herself in a way that demanded attention, delayed only by her own measured caution. Time stretched. Ethan's pulse, previously steady, began to echo in his ears with a rhythm of anticipation. He watched as Clara gently smoothed the hem of her gown, a fleeting, almost unconscious motion, and something about that simplicity made his chest tighten. Here was someone who moved through the world fully present, fully aware, fully alive, a stark contrast to the controlled precision of his own life, where every interaction and observation had a purpose, a measurable outcome. He caught the way her gaze flicked toward the window and lingered on the sunlight filtering through the glass ceiling. There was a quiet reverence in the gesture, an appreciation for something intangible that mirrored the rare moments of awe he occasionally felt while surveying the skyline of a new skyscraper. And in that moment, Ethan understood that this was what he had been missing: the subtleties, the unquantifiable sparks that defy spreadsheets and blueprints, the hidden textures that make life worth inhabiting. The brief exchanges between Clara and the guests continued: small nods, gentle smiles, fleeting touches, but each was imbued with a depth that made Ethan's mind race with questions. Who was she, beyond the emerald dress and the poised exterior? What stories lay beneath her composure? What sorrows or joys had forged her elegance and quiet confidence? He realized he had been observing, analyzing, and yearning all at once. Her every action was a revelation, a contrast to the clinical clarity he had honed over decades. And in that silent recognition, a startling clarity emerged. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and the mere fact of her presence had already begun to rewrite the parameters of his carefully ordered world. A shiver of anticipation ran down his spine as he leaned forward slightly, heart quickening, aware that something indefinable was taking root between them. He didn't know what would come next, but the spark had been ignited, the intrigue planted, and for the first time in years, he felt the electric thrill of genuine curiosity, of wanting, not to control, but simply to witness and understand the life that moved so gracefully before him. And as Clara's eyes briefly met his across the room once again, soft yet unwavering, Ethan felt the first tremors of something that promised to change everything. He exhaled slowly, but the anticipation remained, a suspended question hanging in the golden light. Who was she really? And how much of this night and of his life would she touch? Ethan remained seated in the third row, a silent observer amidst the soft murmur of celebration. The ballroom was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the gentle cadence of jazz that wrapped the space in a warm embrace. Yet, for Ethan, the world had narrowed to a single figure, moving effortlessly across the polished floor, Clara Whitman. Each gesture, each tilt of her head, each soft laugh seemed magnified, imbued with a gravity he couldn't ignore. She approached the bride, exchanging whispered congratulations, and Ethan noticed a glimmer of moisture at the corner of her eyes. It was fleeting, a silent tear, brushed away almost immediately, but it revealed an emotional honesty that drew him in, compelling him to lean forward ever so slightly. Clara's movements were deliberate yet natural. She adjusted the bride's veil with the tenderness of someone who truly understood the significance of the moment, her fingers brushing softly against the delicate fabric as if offering quiet protection. As she turned to greet a group of friends, her laughter was light, unforced, carrying with it a warmth that made the space between them feel smaller. Ethan found himself analyzing the nuances of her interactions, the subtle mirroring of posture, the gentle inflections in her voice, the way she made space for others, even when attention briefly centered on her. Everything she did was human, delicate, precise, and yet it radiated a vitality that shook the carefully constructed walls around him. He exhaled, almost without realizing it, his chest tightening with a tension that had little to do with the music or the crowd. Ethan Pierce, who had built his life on calculation and control, found himself incapable of applying either to Clara. He had measured countless risks, planned skyscrapers with exacting precision, and negotiated deals worth millions, but he could not measure the gravity of her presence, nor could he predict the course of the unfamiliar stirrings that clawed at him from the chest he had long fortified. A flicker of a smile crossed her lips as she shared a private joke with another bridesmaid, and Ethan's pulse quickened. He was caught in a paradox. Desire surged within him, fierce and insistent, yet self-preservation whispered caution. Every fiber of his being had been trained to assess, to distance, to keep potential chaos at arm's length, but Clara was a force that defied protocol. Her very existence in this hall challenged his equilibrium, and he realized that he wanted, desperately, to close that distance, even as he feared what it might expose. He observed the subtle ways she moved through the space. When a young flower girl stumbled slightly, Clara's hand hovered, not pressing, not drawing attention, but her presence alone reassured the child. When she leaned in to share a laugh with the groom's sister, her eyes sparkled with genuine delight, lighting the surrounding air as if charged by some quiet current. Ethan noticed how she allowed herself to be present, fully, without calculation or pretense, and the contrast to his own measured demeanor was almost painful in its clarity. An internal struggle began to unfurl. His analytical mind, normally so adept at parsing behavior and controlling outcomes, faltered under the weight of his fascination. Every observation of Clara ignited questions he could not answer. Who was she beyond this room? What stories had shaped the woman whose laughter could still command gravity, yet felt untethered from the world's expectations? And most importantly, what did it mean that he wanted to step into her orbit, to breach the invisible barrier he had carefully maintained for decades. The music shifted, a soft ballad threading through the chatter, and Ethan's eyes traced Clara's movements as she returned to her seat for a brief pause. She rested her hands lightly on her lap, fingers intertwined, and for a moment she seemed utterly still, yet the room around her continued in motion. In that stillness, Ethan felt the pull of a magnetic field he could neither explain nor resist. He imagined leaning forward, speaking, crossing the invisible distance that separated them, yet something in his chest tightened at the mere thought. His mind raced against itself. The life he had constructed, measured, and protected controlled to the last detail was suddenly fragile, insufficient, irrelevant. Every instinct screamed at him to maintain composure, to observe, to retreat to safety. And yet, another voice, quiet but insistent, whispered that the only way to honor the intensity of what he felt was to embrace the uncertainty, to risk the vulnerability that had eluded him for decades. He noticed another subtle gesture, Clara adjusting a folded napkin on a nearby table for a guest, a touch so small it could have been missed entirely. Yet it spoke volumes. There was care in the act, attention without expectation, generosity without fanfare. Ethan's fascination deepened not with her physicality, though the emerald fabric accentuated her poise, but with the invisible currents of empathy and authenticity that seemed to flow from her effortlessly. A bead of sweat traced the line of his temple, though the room was cool, his palms resting lightly on his knees as he wrestled with the duality of his emotions. Desire warred with caution, curiosity battled restraint, and the sensation of something entirely unknown gripping him from the inside created a tension that was at once intoxicating and terrifying. Clara's glance met his briefly, a spark that lasted only a heartbeat before she turned her attention elsewhere, and it sent a shiver through his spine. He was caught, completely, by the force of her presence. He could not look away, could not disengage, and yet the rational part of him, the part accustomed to structure and predictability, bristled at the chaos she evoked. Ethan realized, with startling clarity, that this fascination was unlike any attraction he had previously experienced. It was not merely physical, nor was it a fleeting infatuation. It was the recognition of depth, of unspoken stories, of a vitality that challenged his carefully constructed isolation. He wanted to understand, to connect, to be part of this rhythm that seemed both fragile and potent. Yet the fear of exposure kept him rooted, observing silently from across the room. The music swelled, the notes threading through the crystalline light, and Ethan's heartbeat mirrored the crescendo. He exhaled, realizing that he was at a precipice. To act would require surrendering control. Yet to remain still was to risk losing the subtle magnetic connection that had already begun to take root. His chest tightened with anticipation, a delicious tension that coiled and lingered, refusing resolution. And, as Clara's eyes flicked toward him once more, catching his gaze for a single, suspended heartbeat, Ethan felt a tension that was not only physical but existential, a realization that his carefully measured world was on the brink of irrevocable change, and that the choice to remain distant might cost him something he had long convinced himself he did not need. The garden doors opened quietly, spilling cool evening air into the ballroom. Ethan followed cautiously, his polished shoes clicking softly on the stone pathway as he trailed Clara without drawing attention. The wedding festivities, the laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses faded behind him, replaced by the delicate rustling of leaves and the distant hum of a string quartet from the reception hall. The garden was intimate, a hidden corner of the property lit with hundreds of small lanterns, casting golden pools of light that danced across the cobblestone paths. Clara paused beneath an arch of wisteria, its blossoms hanging like delicate curtains, and Ethan took a breath, trying to steady the rapid thrum of his heart. She glanced back at him over her shoulder, a soft, knowing smile that carried no judgment, only the invitation to follow. The emerald of her gown gleamed under the lanterns, and for a moment, he allowed himself to simply observe her hair loosely pinned, a few strands escaping to frame her face, her posture simultaneously graceful and relaxed. "Beautiful night," she said softly, the words barely audible over the whisper of the breeze. "Yes," Ethan replied, taking a step closer, though still keeping a respectful distance. Quiet. Away from everything. He gestured vaguely toward the distant glow of the hall, the lingering sounds of celebration barely filtering through. Clara's gaze softened, and she nodded. "It's easier to breathe out here." Her voice carried a weight that hinted at more than the surface tension of the day. Ethan sensed it immediately, a subtle fragility beneath her composure, a glimpse of loneliness masked by poise and charm. He walked alongside her, the stones cool under his polished shoes, the scent of jasmine and night-blooming flowers mingling with the crisp air. I didn't expect to find you here," he admitted, his voice huskier than intended. "I wanted to, I don't know, talk." Away from the crowd. She tilted her head slightly, considering him, and then let a small laugh escape, a laugh that felt both surprised and amused. "I'm glad you did," she said. "It's nice to talk without everyone watching." Her fingers brushed the edge of the wisteria arch as if to anchor herself to the moment, and Ethan noticed the faint tremor, the almost imperceptible pull of nerves beneath her calm exterior. They found a small stone bench tucked beneath an ancient oak, its branches spreading wide, lanterns swinging gently in the evening breeze. Clara sank onto it gracefully, smoothing her gown with delicate hands. Ethan took the opposite side, leaving enough space to respect her privacy, though every inch of the gap felt charged with potential energy. The conversation began cautiously, almost as if both were testing the waters. "The ceremony," Ethan started. "It was beautiful, but I couldn't help noticing how present you were with everyone, and yet, somehow, apart." His eyes met hers, tentative but searching. Clara's lips curved in a faint, reflective smile. "I suppose I like to be there for others, but sometimes you feel like a spectator, don't you?" Her words were carefully measured, yet they carried a resonance that made Ethan's chest tighten. He understood instantly. Her subtle acknowledgement mirrored the isolation he felt in even the most lavish, crowded rooms. "Yes," he admitted quietly, "exactly that. I've been surrounded by people my whole life, in business, in social events, but being truly present, rare, and with you, it felt different." He hesitated, then added, "I don't fully understand it yet, but you're different." Clara looked down for a moment, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, and Ethan noticed the shadow that flickered across her expression. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Sometimes, life takes things away, leaves you wondering if you'll ever feel safe again." The words were deliberately vague, and Ethan resisted pressing too hard, sensing both her caution and the delicate nature of her vulnerability. He exhaled slowly, feeling the pull of empathy tighten around him. I know that feeling," he said. "Not entirely, but enough. I've spent years building walls, maintaining control, and yet, some things people arrive, and suddenly, the walls feel useless." His gaze lingered on hers, earnest and unguarded, conveying the depth of his admission without the need for elaboration. A silence fell between them, warm and contemplative, filled only by the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of music. Ethan sensed her evaluating him, measuring the sincerity of his words, and he dared a small step closer, the distance between them shrinking by inches that seemed monumental. She finally spoke, voice quiet but steady. "It's rare, isn't it, to meet someone who sees without judgment, who notices the details that matter." Her eyes shone faintly under the lantern light, and Ethan felt a swell of recognition. He too had longed for someone who could look past the facades and understand without pretense. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. The garden, the lanterns, the distant music all faded into a backdrop for the quiet intensity of this encounter. Ethan wanted to reach out, to bridge the final distance between them, but he hesitated, Aware that the fragility of this moment demanded patience, Clara's gaze met his again, steady, open, and for the first time in decades, he felt understood in a way that went beyond admiration, beyond attraction. He felt a resonance, a shared recognition of isolation, longing, and the tentative hope for connection. The vulnerability in her posture, the subtle quiver in her hands, the way her breath seemed to catch ever so slightly, it spoke louder than words ever could. He took a breath, knowing that the next step could either deepen this bond or shatter the delicate trust forming in the quiet of the garden. But in that charged silence, he understood something crucial: loneliness could be shared, and perhaps, for the first time, it could be healed in the company of someone who truly saw you. And as the faint wind stirred the wisteria above, brushing softly against their shoulders, Ethan felt the stirrings of something neither of them could fully name, yet a connection that held both promise and fear, an unspoken acknowledgement of what it meant to be truly seen. The night pressed around them, the garden a sanctuary carved out of the chaos of celebration, and in that shared space, Ethan and Clara sat on the edge of discovery, hearts quietly racing, each aware that this moment could change everything if only they dared to step closer. The lanterns swayed gently above the garden path, their soft glow reflecting in the shallow puddles from a recent drizzle. Ethan and Clara continued their quiet walk, moving along the winding stone path that led to a small wrought iron bench nestled near a cluster of flowering hydrangeas. The faint scent of wet earth and blooming petals filled the air, lending a serene hush to the night that made their conversation feel almost sacred. Ethan paused for a moment, his hand hovering over the iron railing of the bench before he settled down beside her. Clara followed, perching gracefully with her hands folded neatly in her lap. The emerald of her gown shimmered softly in the lantern light, but it was the weight behind her gaze that drew his attention, the quiet tension of someone who had seen more than she let on. I wanted to apologize again for arriving late," she said, her voice low, tinged with a nervous laugh. "I hate the idea of disrupting things." Ethan shook his head slightly, smiling faintly. "You didn't disrupt anything. Honestly, I barely remember anyone else when you walked in." His admission hung in the air between them, not boastful, but candid, with a hint of wonder. "You have a way of being fully present, even when you think you're just passing through." Clara looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I try," she murmured, her voice softening. "I've learned the hard way that people notice more than you think. And sometimes that attention comes with consequences." Her fingers fidgeted slightly, twisting the edge of her gown, betraying the calm exterior she maintained so well. Ethan leaned slightly closer, curiosity mingling with a growing tenderness. "Consequences?" he asked gently, his voice carrying an invitation to confide. A sigh escaped her lips, almost imperceptible, yet heavy with unspoken history. "A long time ago, I trusted someone completely, thought they were the person I'd spend my life with. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. I learned that some hearts are fragile in ways you don't anticipate, and some people aren't who you thought they were." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, steady and unguarded, and he felt the subtle tremor of vulnerability behind her composure. Ethan nodded slowly, his own chest tightening with empathy. He knew that weight, the quiet ache of misplaced trust, of emotional investment in someone who could never reciprocate fully. "I understand," he said softly. "Not the exact story, but that sensation of giving yourself and realizing the world isn't built to hold it. I've spent a lifetime building things, structures, empires, but not connections. Not really." His hand brushed slightly against the bench, an unconscious gesture of grounding himself. Clara listened intently, her gaze fixed on him, and for a moment, the distance of years, experience, and guarded hearts seemed to shrink. "It's lonely, isn't it?" she asked quietly. "To achieve what you've built, yet still feel unseen." Ethan exhaled slowly, allowing the honesty to flow freely. "Yes, every day, People admire the projects, the success, the efficiency. They rarely see the person behind it, all the quiet moments of doubt. The nights spent alone in a penthouse that feels more like a showroom than a home. I've built more than structures, but I've neglected being built myself. His gaze traced the delicate curve of her jaw, the faint lines of thought in her brow, and he felt the magnetic pull of someone who might understand without needing every detail spelled out. Clara's lips curved in a subtle, wistful smile. "I know that feeling," she admitted. I've been careful ever since. Careful to protect myself, to shield my heart from disappointment. But when I see someone who seems genuine, who looks past the surface, it's almost disarming." Her eyes met his with a mix of caution and curiosity, and Ethan felt the pull of unspoken recognition. Two people who had both carried invisible burdens now standing in shared understanding. The night air seemed to deepen around them, wrapping them in a quiet cocoon. Ethan leaned slightly forward, the tension between caution and attraction palpable. "You're unlike anyone I've met," he said, his voice husky but sincere. "I don't just mean tonight. I mean the way you carry yourself, the way you notice, the little things. The world notices grandeur. You notice humanity." Clara's gaze softened, and a faint laugh escaped her lips, warm and unguarded. "I suppose that's my profession spilling over," she said. "I spend my days trying to make spaces feel lived in, welcoming, safe. Perhaps I notice what matters more than what dazzles. And perhaps that's why I'm drawn to you," Ethan said quietly, almost more to himself than her, his admission a delicate thread connecting their shared vulnerability. "Because I see the world through plans, through blueprints, through efficiency. But you remind me that life isn't just about structures. It's about the spaces in between and the people who inhabit them." Clara's eyes glimmered, a flicker of warmth and something else. Something unspoken, unclaimed, yet undeniable. "Maybe," she murmured. "We're both trying to understand how to bridge the spaces we've built around ourselves." A hush settled over them, the distant sounds of celebration drifting faintly, muted by the embrace of the garden. Their hands rested almost dangerously close, the tension in the air charged with the quiet magnetism of two lives recognizing the possibility of connection. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat, the overwhelming sensation of empathy and fascination intertwining with a budding desire. I want to know you," he said softly, each word deliberate, careful not to rush, yet unable to contain the truth. "Not just tonight, not just this moment, but you, all of you, the walls, the scars, the laughter, the quiet spaces." Clara's breath caught slightly, a subtle intake that spoke volumes more than any words could convey. I'd like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm cautious. It's been a long time since I trusted someone with everything." Ethan nodded, understanding fully. "So am I," he admitted, a faint wry smile crossing his lips. "But perhaps we can be cautious together. Find out if there's a way to feel safe without being alone." Her gaze held his, steady and open, and in that moment, a fragile but undeniable connection formed, a silent acknowledgement of loneliness shared, and perhaps, just perhaps, of a bond worth exploring. The lanterns above cast flickering patterns across the stones and the folds of their clothing, and, for a heartbeat, the garden seemed suspended in time. Neither spoke immediately, allowing the gravity of shared understanding to fill the space, a quiet intimacy deeper than words. And in that pause, Ethan felt a subtle thrill, a tension of possibility that left him both exhilarated and achingly aware of how tenuous this first connection truly was. They remained there, side by side, hearts quietly attuned to each other, teetering on the edge of discovery. Neither fully letting go nor fully stepping forward, a suspended moment charged with empathy, warmth, and the promise of something neither had expected. The soft hum of the limousine's engine faded beneath the gentle murmur of the wedding guests as Ethan Pierce leaned back in his seat, staring through the rain-speckled window. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, each light twinkling like a distant promise or a question he wasn't ready to answer. The night had been surreal, the garden encounter, the shared confessions, the subtle brush of understanding they replayed endlessly in his mind, an intricate loop that refused to quiet itself. He had always been a man of plans, a man who thrived on certainty, on measured steps, on concrete and steel that didn't waver under the weight of imagination. But now, sitting in that quiet corner of the limousine, he felt something foreign stirring within him, a compulsion that defied logic, that whispered of risk and reward in equal measure. Clara Whitman, in her emerald gown, had shifted the axis of his world in less than an hour. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering over the screen as if the act of touching it would solidify the idea or perhaps shatter it. The city lights blurred in streaks against the raindrops, and he found himself typing almost unconsciously. A flight. Tomorrow morning. New York. Destination Clara's studio. Not a plan. Not a schedule and impulse. A gesture born of the rarest currency in his life, desire without calculation. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. The enormity of what he was about to do crashed over him in waves. What if she thought it was reckless? What if she wasn't ready? What if, God forbid, she didn't feel the same spark he did? His chest tightened at the thought, an unfamiliar tension, both exhilarating and terrifying. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was insane, and yet every rational argument he could summon was drowned beneath a louder, undeniable truth. He needed to see her. The limousine slowed as they passed the last familiar landmarks of downtown Chicago. Ethan's mind was a whirlpool of what-ifs and maybes, the echoes of her laughter, the softness of her voice, the way her eyes seemed to hold unspoken chapters of her life. He couldn't escape them. For the first time in decades, a decision didn't come with a blueprint. It came with a heartbeat. Quick, irregular, alive. He pulled out his laptop, the familiar keys cold beneath his fingers, and began searching flights. Each option made the reality of the choice more tangible. Non-stop from O'Hare to JFK. Early morning departure. Arrival just in time for her routine. The subtle details she had shared in their conversation already etched into his memory. A late breakfast at a small cafe she favored. He remembered the exact corner table. The thought of seeing her there, just as she was, unguarded and natural, sent an electric thrill down his spine. But with the thrill came a weight of responsibility. He wasn't just jumping on a plane, he was stepping into her life uninvited, crossing boundaries he normally respected. And yet, the prospect of not going, of staying behind, filled him with a restless ache, a gnawing doubt that he might never forgive himself. "Do I? Dare?" he whispered to the empty seat beside him. The question seemed to hang in the air, answered only by the rhythm of raindrops against the window. He knew, in that quiet, self-reflective moment, that hesitation was no longer an option. The yearning was too strong, the connection too immediate, too potent to ignore. Ethan's fingers danced over the keyboard, the finality of each click cementing his resolve. Flight booked, hotel nearby. Notes jotted down to remind himself of nothing, nothing of plans, nothing of contingencies. Just him, following a pulse he couldn't quantify, a compass that pointed only to her. Sleep eluded him that night, each hour a restless carousel of possibilities. He imagined her walking through the studio door, hair pulled back, focused on her sketches, and the electric jolt that would shoot through his chest the instant their eyes met again. He imagined the small smile she might give, the subtle recognition of his presence, and the relief and excitement mingling in equal measure. Morning came too quickly, sunlight struggling through heavy clouds. Ethan checked in at O'Hare, his carry-on heavy with essentials but light with expectation. Every security checkpoint, every shuffle through crowded terminals amplified his nervous anticipation. A part of him, the part honed by years of meticulous planning, was screaming about the irrationality, the audacity of this impulsive journey. But another part, quieter yet insistent, whispered that some risks were worth taking, that some hearts demanded action before logic could intervene. As he settled into his seat aboard the early morning flight, the engines roaring to life beneath him, Ethan allowed himself a rare smile. The clouds beyond the window were thick and gray, yet he felt a luminous energy inside him, a buoyancy he hadn't known in years. He closed his eyes, picturing Clara's face, the curve of her smile, the intensity in her gaze, and felt a rush of determination unlike any he had felt in boardrooms or on construction sites. This was no longer about analysis or control. This was about something simpler, yet infinitely more complex human connection, raw and unguarded, something that made all the towers, all the contracts, all the calculated decisions feel hollow in comparison. He was embarking on a journey not measured in miles or minutes, but in vulnerability, courage, and the hope that the spark they had shared could ignite into something lasting. As the plane lifted into the sky, Ethan felt the tangible pull of anticipation, the nervous excitement of uncertainty, and the thrilling, almost terrifying possibility of love waiting on the other side. Every vibration of the engine, every whisper of the air rushing past the fuselage seemed to echo the rhythm of his heart, fast, erratic, alive. He had crossed the first threshold, the point of no return. Above the clouds, looking down at the blur of the city fading into distance, Ethan Pierce felt both fear and exhilaration settle over him like a cloak. Tomorrow, he would step into New York and into Clara's world, uninvited yet compelled, driven by a force he could neither define nor resist. And in that suspended moment, amid the hum of the cabin and the shifting light of dawn, he realized that some decisions could not be postponed. Some desires demanded action, and some hearts simply could not wait. The plane soared higher, carrying him toward an uncertain future, but one undeniably charged with possibility. Ethan's pulse matched the engine's steady rhythm, a cadence of commitment, curiosity, and the quiet thrill of following a path uncharted. And in the back of his mind, a single thought pulsed insistently. Impossibly tomorrow, he would see her. Clara Whitman stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, the warmth of the mug seeping into her palms as she scanned the handwritten notes sprawled across her table. The late morning sun filtered through the cafe's tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the exposed brick walls, illuminating floating dust motes like tiny stars suspended in time. Chelsea Market hummed with life outside, the chatter of tourists blending with the soft clatter of plates and the hiss of the espresso machine. Everything was routine, familiar, comforting. And then, in an instant, it wasn't. She looked up, glancing toward the entrance, expecting another stranger, another hurried face weaving through the morning crowd. But the stranger she saw froze her mid-breath. Ethan Pierce, standing there, slightly disheveled from travel, but impossibly present. His coat clung to him, soaked from the drizzle outside, and yet, somehow, he exuded the effortless composure she had glimpsed the night of the wedding. His eyes met hers, wide with equal parts anticipation and mischief. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. The cafe noises dimmed into a soft, distant hum. Clara felt her pulse quicken, an electric thrill that made her chest tighten with disbelief and joy. He was here. She hadn't imagined it. He had really come. "Ethan," she breathed, half question, half exclamation, her voice carrying a mixture of shock and delight. "Clara," he said, stepping closer, his smile breaking through the last of her hesitation. "Good morning." "Surprise." She laughed, a bright, slightly incredulous sound that drew a few curious glances from nearby tables. "Surprise doesn't even begin to cover it," she admitted, motioning for him to join her. He moved with a natural ease, sliding into the chair opposite her with a subtle grace that made her pulse flutter anew. "I didn't expect you here," she confessed, studying his damp hair, the faint crease of travel fatigue softened by the warmth in his gaze. "I mean, you live in Chicago. Flights aren't exactly a casual stroll down the street." Ethan shrugged, a playful glint lighting his eyes. Neither did I expect to be thinking about someone this intensely, he said softly, leaning forward, elbows resting on the table. But when you're in my head, Clara, logic tends to take a back seat. She shook her head, still laughing, a mixture of disbelief and affection warming her chest. I should be offended, but somehow, I'm not. Somehow, I think I might like it. Outside, the city continued in its relentless motion, pedestrians weaving past the cafe, taxis honking, street vendors calling their wares. The contrast between the bustling New York streets and the suspended, intimate bubble of their table was almost surreal. Clara noticed the sunlight catching the highlights in Ethan's hair, the subtle warmth in his expression, and the way he seemed simultaneously grounded and untethered, a man who had built empires yet had allowed himself to be swept into something profoundly human. "I can't believe you actually came," she murmured, tracing a finger along the edge of her coffee cup. You didn't tell me. Just appeared impulsive," he admitted with a grin, his eyes sparkling. "Completely irrational. But if you knew how often I've calculated every risk in my life, you'd understand that this is huge. For me." Clara tilted her head, amused by the mix of vulnerability and audacity. "So, flying across the country for a cup of coffee, that's huge for someone who designs skyscrapers for a living. It's huge because it's about something I can't control," Ethan said, leaning back slightly. "Concrete follows rules. Steel obeys physics. People don't. And yet, here I am, breaking all my rules because of you." Her laugh softened into a tender smile, and the air between them shimmered with the quiet magic of recognition. For months, she had moved cautiously through life, guarding herself against disappointment, against the familiar ache of misplaced trust, and here he was, a man she barely knew, yet somehow felt like she had known all her life, standing in front of her with a sincerity that refused to be ignored. Clara took a sip of her coffee, the warmth grounding her amidst the rush of emotions. "You do realize this is insane, right?" she asked, her tone teasing yet layered with wonder. "Most people don't just show up at someone's cafe unannounced. It's reckless." Ethan mirrored her tone with a subtle shrug, eyes dancing with humor. "Insanity has its place. Sometimes it's the only way to discover what's real." Their conversation meandered, flowing effortlessly between playful banter and quieter moments of mutual acknowledgement. They watched the world move around them, but within the confines of that small cafe, the outside chaos seemed almost irrelevant. A waiter refilled their cups, a couple walked past, laughing, and yet every detail, the clink of porcelain, the soft jazz filtering through the speakers, the faint aroma of fresh pastries felt heightened, magnified by the intensity of the moment. Clara noticed, almost imperceptibly, the subtle changes in Ethan, the slight twitch of his fingers as he leaned forward, the faint crease of concentration in his brow when he listened intently, the way his laughter softened his usual authoritative demeanor. She realized, with a quiet thrill, that she had not only missed this man's presence, but had underestimated the depth of curiosity he could inspire. And then, in a heartbeat, the playful tension shifted. A shared glance, a brush of fingers as she reached for her sugar packet, sent an unexpected charge through the air. It was a simple, fleeting contact, but it carried the weight of unspoken possibilities. Both of them leaned slightly closer, and the world outside the busy streets, the noise, the hurried pace fell away, leaving only the subtle symphony of two hearts recognizing each other. Clara bit her lower lip, a gesture of amusement and anticipation combined, and Ethan caught it immediately, his eyes softening, a quiet smile touching his lips. The surreal exhilaration of the moment settled over them, an intoxicating mixture of delight and disbelief. She had expected a normal morning, another ordinary day, but instead, the universe had conspired to create a collision of timing and intent that left them suspended on the edge of something extraordinary. "Coffee with you. It's already better than I imagined," Ethan said, voice low but confident. "And we haven't even left this table yet." Clara shook her head, laughing softly, feeling a warmth bloom from chest to fingertips. "You're ridiculous," she replied, but there was no edge to her words, only the tremor of joy that echoed in her heartbeat. Their laughter mingled with the sounds of the cafe, a private melody in the midst of the city's constant rhythm. And as the minutes stretched, unhurried, charged with anticipation, both realized that this morning, this improbable, audacious morning, had already changed everything. The spark from Chicago had not only survived, but ignited, and neither could deny it. Ethan finally leaned back, eyes glinting with amusement and quiet awe. "So," he said, playful yet deliberate, "do we start exploring New York now? Or do we savor the fact that I showed up like a cliché romance hero?" Clara's smile widened, heart fluttering. "I think we do both," she replied, her voice carrying the light, teasing tone that had always drawn him in. "But only if you promise not to get lost in my city." "I make no promises," he said with a mock-serious nod. "But I do promise that wherever we go, it'll be memorable." And as they shared that brief, exhilarating exchange, the pulse of the city seemed to sync with their own busy, unpredictable, alive. The world outside continued its relentless motion, but inside that small cafe, time and expectation had been suspended, leaving only two people, their astonishment mirrored in one another, and the fragile, thrilling possibility of what could come next. The streets of Manhattan had begun to hum with the late afternoon lull, the golden light slanting between brick buildings and glass towers, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. Clara led Ethan down a quieter lane, a narrow street that smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans and sun-warmed asphalt, its charm lying in the small, tucked-away studios and galleries that lined the block. He followed with a mixture of curiosity and quiet anticipation, the energy from the cafe still lingering between them, a soft electric charge neither wanted to dissipate. Finally, they stopped in front of a modest brick building, its large window adorned with sketches taped haphazardly around the frame. Clara fumbled with the door latch, laughing softly as the lock resisted, finally giving way with a reluctant click. "Welcome to my chaos," she said, pushing the door open with a flourish. Ethan stepped inside and was immediately struck by the studio's atmosphere. Light poured in through skylights, illuminating a room that smelled faintly of paint, clay, and coffee, the faint, comforting perfume of creation. Canvases leaned against the walls, some completed, others in progress, sketches of figures, abstract shapes, and fleeting moments of human connection cluttered tables and easels. The space felt alive, infused with Clara's presence, a tangible extension of her mind and soul. "Wow," Ethan breathed, his voice low, reverent. "It's incredible." Clara's eyes twinkled, a mixture of pride and shyness. "It's messy," she admitted, waving her hand at the jumble of pencils, paints, and papers. "But it's mine. Everything here. It's pieces of thoughts I can't always speak aloud." He moved slowly, observing the sketches pinned to a corkboard above a drafting table. Each image told a story: a mother cradling a newborn, a couple laughing in a rainstorm, a solitary figure staring out a window at a fading sunset. There was a subtle, quiet longing in the lines, a tenderness in the shading, a sense of empathy and understanding for the small, delicate moments of life. "These are beautiful," Ethan said softly, leaning closer to examine a sketch of an elderly man feeding pigeons in the park. The strokes were deliberate, each line infused with care, capturing not just the scene, but the emotion beneath it. They feel alive. "They are alive," Clara whispered, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I try to capture moments people overlook, the little things that make life fragile, precious, meaningful." Her gaze met his, a subtle vulnerability lurking behind her warm expression. "It's my way of making sense of the world." Ethan's heart thumped, an unfamiliar mixture of admiration and awe curling in his chest. He had spent decades building tangible things: steel, glass, concrete, but this intangible, delicate work stirred something deeper. Watching her interact with her own creations, he realized he had never truly understood that artistry could be both brave and tender, commanding and intimate at the same time. Clara moved over to a large table littered with sketches and watercolor washes. She picked up a delicate drawing, one that depicted a small child reaching for a falling leaf, eyes wide with wonder and innocence. "I did this a few months ago," she explained, turning it toward him. "A friend's daughter. I wanted to capture the moment before the leaf touched the ground, the anticipation, the fleeting joy." Ethan studied the drawing, noting the precision in her lines, the subtlety in the shading, the attention to the delicate balance between light and shadow. You see everything," he said softly, almost in awe. "Not just what's there, but what it feels like." Clara's lips curved in a small smile, tinged with surprise that he could see beyond the surface. "I try," she said simply. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone notices." Ethan shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "I notice. And more than that, I admire it. Not just the skill, the technique, but the care. The way you care about life, even in the smallest details. It's rare." A blush colored her cheeks, and she looked down at the sketch again, as if embarrassed by his praise. Yet, there was a subtle lift in her posture, a quiet pride mingled with vulnerability. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost lost beneath the gentle hum of the studio. "It's nice to be seen." He stepped closer, unable to resist the pull of her presence, and his eyes followed her movements as she arranged several sketches on a nearby easel. There was grace in the way she moved, an unspoken rhythm, as if the studio itself danced to the cadence of her hands and thoughts. Ethan realized that he wasn't just observing her talent, he was witnessing her soul laid bare, delicate yet resilient, luminous in its authenticity. The afternoon sunlight shifted, casting a warm glow over the room, highlighting the faint lines of fatigue on her face, the quiet concentration in her eyes, the subtle tilt of her head as she evaluated a composition. Ethan felt a wave of admiration and something deeper, something that went beyond physical attraction. It was the recognition of a person who had endured, who had crafted beauty from the fragments of experience, who had chosen empathy and expression over cynicism or detachment. Clara noticed his gaze lingering and met it with a small, teasing smile. "You're staring," she said softly, almost playfully, though there was a hint of vulnerability in her tone. "I'm trying to understand you," he admitted, "and I think I'm beginning to." She laughed, a gentle, airy sound that blended seamlessly with the soft hum of the city beyond the studio walls. "Good," she said, "because I don't make it easy." And yet, in the warmth of the studio, surrounded by evidence of her inner life, Ethan realized that he didn't want easy. He wanted the complexity, the depth, the quiet revelation of who she was. Every brushstroke, every pencil line, every careful composition had unveiled a part of her he hadn't seen anywhere else, and it drew him closer, a gravitational pull he had no intention of resisting. He picked up a small sketch she had left on the edge of the table, a delicate drawing of a single flower pressed against a rain-dappled window. The fragility of the petals, the attention to the subtle reflections on the glass, mirrored the quiet strength he had sensed in Clara herself. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze, and in that shared silence, a mutual understanding settled between them. Here, in this small, cluttered studio, amid the scattered evidence of her life and creativity, Ethan didn't just admire Clara. He felt the beginnings of something more profound, a deep, stirring connection that transcended attraction and spoke to the essence of who she was. And as he stood there, holding her sketch with care, he felt an unfamiliar but exhilarating sense of hope. Clara, for her part, watched him with a soft, contemplative smile, sensing the shift in the room's energy, the quiet recognition that something meaningful had begun, something delicate and fragile, yet impossibly real. The afternoon waned, but neither of them moved to leave. Instead, they lingered in the shared intimacy of creativity and understanding. The studio walls containing not just art, but the beginning of something extraordinary between two people who had, against all odds, found each other. The studio's late afternoon quietness had settled into a delicate rhythm, the soft hum of the city beyond the windows mingling with the faint scent of pencil shavings and paint. Ethan and Clara sat on low stools by a large table scattered with sketches, the air between them thick with unspoken thoughts. There was a gravity now, a subtle tension that neither wanted to break, the kind of silence that feels heavy, yet inviting. Clara's fingers toyed with the edge of a charcoal drawing, tracing lines she had made months before. Ethan watched her quietly, noticing the small tremor in her hands, the way her eyes lingered on the sketches, almost as if seeking courage from the images she had created. He waited, sensing that whatever she was about to say would carry weight, and he did not want to interrupt it. Finally, her voice broke the silence, low and careful, as if testing the waters. "There was a time when I didn't trust love," she said, eyes cast downward. "Not really. I thought I did. But I learned the hard way that some people, they leave scars, permanent ones." Ethan's chest tightened. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, giving her his full attention. "Scars," he prompted gently, his voice soft, inviting but without pressure. Clara hesitated, a deep breath escaping her as she glanced at him, her green eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and cautious hope. "I was with someone who controlled everything I did, my choices, my friends, even the way I expressed myself. And when I tried to leave, the betrayal, it wasn't just emotional, it was—" Her voice faltered, trembling slightly, and she swallowed, her throat tight. "It was almost like they wanted to break me completely." Ethan felt a wave of empathy, a painful recognition of the kind of loneliness and fear she must have endured. He wanted to reach out, to offer reassurance, but he held back just enough to respect the space she needed to speak on her terms. "Clara," he said quietly, "I can't imagine what that was like, but I'm here. I see you, and I don't want to fix it, because it's not mine to fix. I just want you to know I understand that it hurts." She looked up at him then, a flicker of surprise crossing her face at the gentleness and sincerity in his tone. "You understand," she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice making her seem fragile and fierce at the same time. Ethan nodded, his eyes unwavering. "I've carried my own share of walls," he admitted. "Loneliness, loss, control over everything in my life, but I've never had someone like you. Someone whose presence makes me want to put all that aside, even if just for a moment." A faint smile ghosted across Clara's lips, bittersweet, yet tinged with warmth. She shifted slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough to let a small measure of trust seep through. "It's hard to let go," she murmured. "Even when you want to. Even when you want to believe in something new." "I know," Ethan said softly, leaning back but keeping his gaze fixed on her. "And you don't have to let go all at once. You just have to allow yourself to feel safe enough to start." His words were steady, grounding, and Clara felt their weight as if they were a lifeline cast across a stormy sea. Clara exhaled slowly, a shiver running through her as if a part of her had been braced for rejection, but found none. "I lost a lot," she admitted, voice trembling with honesty. "Family, friends, trust in people who promised they'd never hurt me. It's like building a wall around yourself, piece by piece, until you don't know who you are anymore." Ethan's hands found hers instinctively, the contact gentle but firm, grounding them both in the moment. "You are still who you are," he said, voice low but unwavering. "And every scar, every piece of that wall, it's proof of your strength. Not just your survival, but your courage to still hope, still create, still be who you are despite it all." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, a mixture of relief and recognition. For the first time in years, she felt seen without judgment, validated without explanation. "I don't know if I've ever felt that," she admitted softly, "to be understood, not pitied, not fixed, just understood." Ethan squeezed her hands gently, a quiet, reassuring anchor. "That's all I can offer," he said. "But I promise, I will always try to understand. I will never try to control you, never try to change you. I just want to be here, with you." A quiet intensity hung between them, the kind of connection that goes beyond words, beyond gestures, and resonates in the very core of one's being. It was intimate, tender, and brimming with unspoken recognition. The scars, the betrayals, the fears, they were acknowledged, validated, and for the first time, they felt lighter, shared, rather than carried alone. Clara allowed herself a small, shaky laugh, a sound that held both vulnerability and a glimmer of hope. "You really have a way with words, don't you?" she said, her tone teasing but fragile. "I only speak when it matters," Ethan replied, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "And this matters." For a long moment, they sat together, hands intertwined, the soft light from the skylights illuminating their faces, highlighting the raw honesty that had passed between them. It was a pause that felt suspended in time, the kind of silence that says more than conversation ever could. And as Clara leaned slightly closer, resting her shoulder against Ethan's, the studio seemed to hold its breath, the world outside fading into the background. They shared the space, the vulnerability, and the quiet, burgeoning trust, the kind that promises that, even with scars, connection is possible. Somewhere in the back of both their minds, a flicker of hope began to glow, delicate yet persistent, the kind that promises beginnings even when the past has been cruel. And as they lingered in that fragile, intimate moment, neither of them spoke, letting the unspoken acknowledgement of pain, understanding, and tentative trust settle between them. The first drops hit the window with a soft but insistent rhythm, a staccato tapping that drew Ethan's attention away from the chopping board he was nervously holding. He glanced outside, noticing the sudden darkening of the sky over New York, a dramatic shift that seemed to come out of nowhere. Clara peeked through the kitchen window, her brow arched in mild surprise, then laughed softly. "Well," she said, "I didn't expect a storm today." Ethan's usual measured calm flickered as he smiled. "Neither did I. But I'm glad it happened." His voice carried a mixture of amusement and an unspoken eagerness. There was something about the rain, the confined space, the warm hum of the apartment that made everything feel heightened, more immediate, more real. They moved around each other in the kitchen, Clara pulling a stool closer to the counter while Ethan prepared the ingredients for a simple pasta dinner. Flour dusted the counter, a light haze that glimmered in the afternoon light filtering through the windows. The aroma of garlic sizzling in olive oil mingled with the scent of fresh basil, filling the apartment with a domestic warmth that contrasted sharply with the wild, wet world outside. Clara glanced at him as he stirred the sauce, noticing the faint tension in his jaw, the way he leaned slightly closer than necessary, as if the proximity was comforting him as much as it was for her. "You seem distracted," she teased lightly, though her green eyes were curious, tracing his every movement. "I'm distracted," Ethan admitted, his hands pausing mid-stir. "I'm not used to this, being here, with you, like this. It feels different." Clara's lips curved in a smile that was both teasing and tender. "Different can be good," she said softly. "It doesn't have to be scary." As they moved to the counter to chop vegetables together, their fingers brushed occasionally, the small touches electric yet grounding. Ethan felt his pulse quicken with every accidental contact, his normally disciplined mind struggling to focus on the mundane task of slicing bell peppers. Clara, aware of the subtle tension, let herself linger slightly longer than necessary, feeling the quiet thrill of connection, the exhilaration of shared space and shared silence. A clap of thunder rolled across the city, vibrating through the walls, prompting both of them to laugh. "Well, that's dramatic," Clara said, her hand instinctively finding the small of Ethan's back as she stepped closer to avoid the spray of water misting in from the slightly ajar window. "I like dramatic," Ethan replied, a rare openness in his voice, a slight smile breaking the usual reserve he carried like armor. Especially when it has a purpose. Their laughter eased into conversation, stories spilling from each of them in an effortless rhythm. Ethan spoke of his childhood summers by Lake Michigan, the quiet discipline of his early work, the moments of isolation despite professional triumphs. Clara shared memories of her first art shows, the thrill of seeing a blank canvas transform into something alive, and the small heartbreaks that shaped her trust in people. Each revelation, each detail, drew them closer, weaving a tapestry of intimacy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The rain intensified, drumming harder against the windows, the city outside seemingly transformed into a silver blur. Ethan paused, leaning against the counter, watching Clara sprinkle parmesan over the finished pasta. The golden light caught her hair just so, highlighting the subtle curve of her smile. And something inside him loosened a wall he hadn't known he'd built for decades. Clara, he started, voice catching slightly, a rare vulnerability threading through it. I don't usually do this. Say things, feel things. But being here with you, I can't ignore it. I think I'm falling for you. Clara froze for a moment. Fork paused in midair, a wave of surprise and something deeper hope flickering in her expression. Then she met his gaze steadily, a quiet smile breaking through the tension. Ethan, I was afraid you'd say that, she whispered, the admission carrying equal parts relief and vulnerability. Because I feel the same. I have for a while now. I just didn't know if it was real, or if it was just... She trailed off, letting the storm outside punctuate her uncertainty. The sound of the rain seemed to echo their heartbeat, fast and erratic, as if the city itself had paused to witness this confession. Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his, the gesture simple but monumental. It's real, he said, conviction steady and warm. I don't want to hold back anymore, not from you, not from this. Clara's fingers curled around his, tight and reassuring, her green eyes glistening in the warm kitchen light. Neither do I, she admitted, voice soft but certain. I've been afraid of letting anyone in, but you make it easier. The storm outside raged on, rain streaking the windows, lightning flickering in the distance, but inside the apartment, warmth and closeness had taken over. They moved together instinctively, finishing the meal in companionable silence, sharing tastes and small smiles, occasional teasing glances, each moment deepening their connection. The ordinary act of cooking became charged with extraordinary emotion, each glance, touch, and shared laugh a testament to the intimacy growing organically between them. As they sat down to eat, the rain softened into a steady patter, rhythmic and soothing, mirroring the calm certainty beginning to settle in their hearts. Ethan watched Clara cross the small table, her eyes reflecting both the storm outside and the newfound hope inside. For a long moment, words were unnecessary. The presence of each other, the warmth, the shared vulnerability, said more than any declaration could. Yet even in this closeness, a tender tension lingered, the kind that makes hearts race and breaths hitch, leaving the audience suspended in that perfect balance of exhilaration and delicate uncertainty. Outside, the city continued in its chaos, but within that small kitchen, time had slowed to the pulse of a shared, electric understanding. And as they exchanged a fleeting glance over the plates, the silent acknowledgement of mutual affection hung in the air, tentative, thrilling, and brimming with the promise of what might come next. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Clara's studio, dust motes dancing lazily in the warm light. Ethan stood near the door, hands in pockets, taking a deep breath. He had rehearsed the words in his mind countless times during the flight from Chicago and in the cab through New York. Yet now, facing Clara, he felt the familiar hum of uncertainty, a tension that made his pulse quicken. Clara was arranging sketches on a table, her sleeves rolled up, paint smudges on her hands, a look of focused concentration that always made Ethan feel both awe and a tender protectiveness. He hesitated for a beat, then cleared his throat. "Clara," he began, voice firm but carrying an undertone of vulnerability. She turned, eyebrows raised slightly, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. "I know this might seem sudden, and maybe a little crazy." Her smile, that easy curve of lips that always disarmed him, stayed in place. "Ethan, you say that a lot," she teased softly, but her eyes betrayed curiosity, tinged with the gentle anxiety of anticipation. He stepped closer, closing the small distance that had always felt charged with quiet energy. "Maybe it is," he admitted, voice low, measured, "but it's honest. And it's something I've been thinking about since the moment I met you." Clara tilted her head, sensing the gravity behind his words, feeling the weight of a revelation poised to descend. "You're scaring me a little," she said, her lips quirked in amusement, yet her pulse quickened. "I hope so," he said, stepping fully into the sunlit space, letting the warmth wrap around both of them. "Because what I'm about to say, it's more than just us, more than feelings, more than attraction. I want to propose something bold, something that combines love and purpose." Her green eyes widened, a flicker of incredulity mixed with excitement. Ethan paused, reaching into his jacket pocket, and withdrew a small, elegantly carved wooden box. She instinctively leaned forward, the sketches on the table momentarily forgotten. He opened it, revealing a simple yet exquisite ring, its design echoing natural forms, leaves intertwined in gold, symbolizing growth, resilience, and harmony. Clara gasped softly, a delicate sound that made his chest tighten. "I know we've only known each other a short time," Ethan began, kneeling on one knee. "But in this short time, you've changed my world. You've shown me depth, creativity, patience, and a capacity to care that I thought I'd buried under years of work and control." His voice faltered for only a moment, then steadied, strong and unwavering. "Clara Whitman, will you marry me?" Clara blinked, overwhelmed, the room spinning slightly as her heart raced. She opened her mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. "Not finished. This is not all," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "I want us to do more than just be together. I've been thinking about the old Marston estate, abandoned, forgotten, falling into decay. I see it as more than a project. I see it as a place where your art, our vision, could create something lasting. A community space, an art center, a place for people to grow and connect. I want us to restore it together." Clara's breath caught. She had seen the estate, overgrown with weeds, windows boarded up, the weight of neglect heavy in the empty halls. The idea of transforming it had haunted her imaginings, but to hear Ethan speak of it not as a dream, but as a plan, as a shared mission, made her pulse leap. "You mean, not just marriage," she whispered, voice trembling slightly, "but a partnership, in life, love, and purpose." "Yes," he said simply, eyes locked on hers, heart racing. "I want us to build something together, something meaningful, something that blends our worlds, your creativity, my resources, our hearts." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by a mixture of awe, love, and the thrill of possibility. The idea was audacious, almost unbelievable, yet entirely true. Ethan's gaze, steady and warm, promised commitment not only to her heart, but to a shared journey that could change lives beyond their own. She placed a trembling hand over his, feeling the heat of his skin, the reassurance of his presence. "Ethan, Her voice caught, emotion choking her. She laughed softly, a mix of disbelief and joy. "Yes, yes to everything. To you, to us, to this dream." Ethan's smile was radiant, his usual controlled demeanor melting into pure elation. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the gold catching the sunlight, a tangible symbol of love and possibility. They rose together, arms entwined, standing in the studio that had become a witness to their private universe, the sketches and paints now silent observers to this pivotal moment. The city outside continued its relentless rhythm, oblivious to the transformation happening within these walls. But inside, a new world had begun, a world where love and vision intertwined, where two hearts committed not only to each other, but to creating something enduring. For a long moment, they simply stood, foreheads touching, letting the enormity of the commitment settle, feeling the thrilling, almost overwhelming sense of possibility. In that quiet pause, in the glow of sunlight, and the lingering scent of paints and basil, the audience is left suspended, hearts lifted, minds alight with awe at the fusion of romance, ambition, and shared purpose. And as they finally stepped back, hands still entwined, smiles lingering, the unspoken promise of their future hung in the air, a twist of fate that was daring, beautiful, and utterly irresistible. The morning sunlight streamed through the restored windows of the Marston estate, painting golden rectangles across the polished wooden floors. Birds fluttered among the newly planted gardens, a soft rustling accompanying the gentle breeze that carried the scent of jasmine and fresh-cut grass. The estate, once derelict and forlorn, now brimmed with life and purpose, much like the two people who had brought it back from neglect. Clara Whitman stood before a tall mirror in what had once been the grand drawing room, now transformed into a bridal suite with minimalist elegance. The pale sky blue of her dress caught the sunlight in delicate waves, emphasizing her quiet strength and individuality. It was a bold choice, unconventional, but perfectly reflective of her spirit's soft, yet unmistakably vivid. She turned slowly, letting the fabric sweep gracefully along the floor, imagining Ethan's eyes on her. Ethan Pierce, in a tailored navy suit that spoke of understated refinement, lingered just outside the door. He paused, taking in the sight of her, feeling a deep swell of emotion that he hadn't anticipated when he first arrived at the estate months ago. His heart beat faster, a mixture of awe and anticipation, as he watched her move with calm confidence, every gesture grounded yet filled with warmth. The couple had chosen to forego the traditional wedding trappings. Instead, they had invited only a few close friends. The ceremony set in the estate's restored atrium, where sunlight streamed through the glass ceilings, creating a natural cathedral of light. Their shared vision of art and community permeated the atmosphere, as every corner bore traces of their combined effort, from the freshly painted murals to the hand-carved benches lining the aisle. As Clara adjusted the small floral accents in her hair, Ethan stepped in quietly, the soft click of his shoes on the polished floor announcing his presence. She turned, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, words unnecessary as their shared history and passion spoke volumes. "Sky blue suits you," Ethan said, his voice low, a hint of awe and tenderness threading through it. Clara smiled, a small knowing curve of her lips. "I wanted something different, something like us. Unconventional, but true." She stepped closer, and he reached for her hands, warm and steady, grounding her in the moment. They moved to the center of the atrium, where a simple wooden arch adorned with seasonal flowers framed their shared view of the gardens beyond. The early afternoon light glinted through the glass, creating halos around their heads as they began to rehearse their vows. Ethan cleared his throat, glancing at the carefully folded paper in his hands, though he barely needed it. "Clara, from the moment you stepped into my life, everything shifted. You brought color to corners I thought had gone gray forever. Today I promise to honor your spirit, to nurture our dreams, and to walk with you, side by side, through every storm and sunlit day." His voice wavered just slightly, the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior breaking through, lending authenticity to every word. Clara's breath caught, her pulse quickening as she reached for his hands, feeling the familiar solidity of his presence. "Ethan, you've taught me that love can be patient and bold at the same time. You've shown me that a heart can be both brave and tender. I promise to meet you with honesty, to hold space for our passions, and to love you fully for who you are and who we become together." The rehearsal was punctuated by quiet laughter, small smiles, and the occasional nervous glance that spoke volumes. Each word, each gesture, deepened their intimacy, binding them not just in ceremony, but in shared understanding and unspoken promises. The estate itself seemed to breathe with them, the culmination of months of labor and vision, now mirroring the careful building of trust, affection, and hope between them. Outside, the garden buzzed softly with the sounds of preparation flowers being positioned, benches aligned, and the subtle shuffle of attendants ensuring every detail was perfect. Yet inside, there was a bubble of serenity, a space where time seemed to pause and bend around the two of them. As they practiced the final lines of their vows, their eyes met, and a quiet electricity passed between them. In that gaze, each recognized the other's courage and vulnerability, the lifetime of experiences that had led them to this singular, radiant moment. The anticipation of what was to come mingled with the nostalgia of their separate journeys, converging in a shared heartbeat of love, trust, and hope. The mini-climax reached its peak as they stepped closer, hands intertwined, ready to face not only the vows, but the life they had envisioned together. In that suspended moment, every fear, every doubt, every longing dissolved into the profound certainty of connection. The room shimmered with quiet exhilaration, a prelude to the lifelong commitment that would soon be sealed, leaving the audience poised at the edge of breathless anticipation. And as they lingered, foreheads touching, fingers entwined, the world outside faded, leaving only the promise of shared purpose, unspoken dreams, and hearts fully open to what lay ahead. The lingering feeling of intimacy and quiet awe left the moment suspended in time, the emotional crescendo hanging like the first note of a symphony yet to fully unfold. The morning sky over the Marston estate was painted in soft lavender and rose hues, a delicate canvas that seemed made for the occasion. A light breeze stirred the newly restored wisteria that draped gracefully above the intimate ceremony space, the fragrant blooms forming a natural canopy that whispered of romance and renewal. The estate, alive with months of transformation, now held a quiet reverence, each corner imbued with the love and effort of Ethan and Clara's shared vision. Guests gathered in a small semicircle, family and close friends who had witnessed the journey, from the first hesitant glances to the courageous declarations of shared dreams. Their expressions ranged from quiet anticipation to soft tears of joy, mirroring the delicate tension and anticipation vibrating in the air. The absence of pomp or pretense lent an authenticity to the moment, making the love unfolding feel both personal and monumental. Clara stood beneath the wisteria, her sky blue gown a beacon of individuality and quiet strength. The fabric caught the sunlight, refracting soft tones onto the polished stone pathway. Her hands trembled just slightly as she smoothed the folds of her dress, a mixture of nerves and exhilaration that only heightened her radiant presence. Ethan, just steps away, met her gaze, the familiar depth of emotion reflected in her eyes, sending a shiver of connection through him. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate but tender, echoing the gravity and beauty of the moment. Ethan had always been measured, controlled, and precise. Yet standing before Clara now, he felt the raw thrill of vulnerability and surrender, the years of solitude, the internal barriers he had erected around himself, seemed to melt in the warmth of shared presence. "Clara," Ethan began, his voice carrying with quiet strength, "we've traveled paths filled with loss, doubt, and solitude. And yet, here we are. You've brought light to the shadows, courage to the hesitations, and love where I never thought it could dwell again. I promise to stand beside you, to nurture what we've created, and to honor your spirit in every day we share." His words hung in the air, a reverent offering to the life they were about to begin together. Clara's response was measured yet overflowing with emotion. "Ethan, you have shown me that hearts can be brave again, that trust can be rebuilt, and that love can bloom even after the deepest wounds. I promise to meet you with honesty, with compassion, and with courage. I will celebrate your victories and hold you through every challenge, as we create a life grounded in truth, creativity, and unwavering partnership. The vows echoed their previous confessions, a delicate resonance of all they had shared: the heartbreaks, the triumphs, the quiet moments of understanding. Each phrase, each pause, carried the weight of their history and the lightness of their hope. Friends and family witnessed not merely a formal exchange, but a living testament to courage, forgiveness, and the power of connection. As they exchanged rings, simple bands that symbolized continuity and shared commitment, the emotional resonance reached its peak. The warmth of the sun illuminated the couple as they slid the rings onto each other's fingers, each touch deliberate, imbued with reverence. Ethan's thumb brushed against Clara's hand, eliciting a fleeting shiver that spoke louder than words, a reminder of the depth of intimacy and trust that had blossomed between them. Soft murmurs of awe passed among the small assembly. Some wiped eyes that had become misty. Others leaned in, sensing the extraordinary blend of private vulnerability and public affirmation. The atmosphere, suspended between serene beauty and potent emotional release, was a testament to the triumph of love over past scars, of connection over isolation. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the couple's eyes locked once more, a silent vow extending beyond ceremony. Ethan's smile carried both pride and humility, while Clara's mirrored joy, awe, and the profound relief of healing that had been a long time coming. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath as two lives, once fractured by circumstance and doubt, finally merged in a shared embrace of commitment, creativity, and hope. The ceremony concluded not with fanfare, but with quiet applause and gentle laughter, as if the universe itself exhaled in celebration. Guests lingered, reluctant to break the spell, sharing whispered congratulations that blended seamlessly with the ambient sounds of the estate, the rustling wisteria, the soft coo of birds, and the distant hum of life continuing beyond the sacred moment. Clara and Ethan stepped together beneath the floral canopy, hands intertwined, hearts aligned. Every scar, every moment of doubt, every hesitation along the way had led to this crescendo, a public acknowledgement of private triumph, a testimony to resilience and the unshakable power of shared love. The emotional payoff was palpable, leaving the audience suspended in a delicate mixture of awe, joy, and quiet reflection, anticipating the unfolding of life yet to come. The lingering impression was one of completeness and ongoing possibility. The ceremony had closed a chapter of individual struggles and opened a new narrative of unity and hope. As they shared a lingering glance, the silent understanding between them radiated with promise, leaving a breathless pause that lingered like a soft refrain in the hearts of all who witnessed it. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows of the restored Marston estate, spilling warmth across the freshly polished floors and filling the grand hall with a gentle radiance. The scent of varnished wood mingled with the faint aroma of paint and clay, a testament to the creative energy that now pulsed within the estate's walls. Where once there had been silence and decay, now thrived the laughter and chatter of young artists, each immersed in the pursuit of expression, their enthusiasm tangible and infectious. Ethan Pierce stood near the entrance, his usual composed demeanor softened by a rare, unguarded smile. Beside him, Clara Whitman moved gracefully among the newcomers, offering encouragement, guidance, and subtle words of inspiration. Her hands, stained with pastels from her own sketches, brushed lightly over the easel of a young painter, and her voice carried a gentle authority, one earned through years of experience and the trials she had endured. "This is it," Ethan murmured, his eyes sweeping over the bustling activity, all those risks, the doubts. It was worth every step to see this moment. His voice, rarely so candid, held an undercurrent of awe and gratitude. Clara squeezed his hand in quiet agreement, her gaze reflective yet filled with pride. "And it's only the beginning," she replied, her tone infused with optimism, her presence radiating the warmth that had first captivated him. The estate had transformed into a haven for creativity, sculptors shaping raw clay into elegant forms, painters translating emotion onto canvas, and designers experimenting with textures and materials in collaborative spaces. Each young artist carried their own stories, challenges, and hopes, and the walls seemed to hum with the quiet validation of their efforts. The energy was both contagious and grounding, a reminder of the profound impact that two determined hearts could impart on the lives of others. Ethan walked slowly through the studios, observing the meticulous attention of a young ceramicist as she molded clay, a slight furrow on her brow betraying her focus and determination. "Beautiful work," he said softly, drawing her attention without interrupting her flow. Her eyes lit up, a mixture of surprise and gratitude, and she nodded, returning to her craft with renewed confidence. These small moments, once unnoticed in his structured life, now resonated deeply, feeding a sense of purpose he had long neglected. Clara moved toward a cluster of painters, offering gentle feedback, her laughter ringing like chimes against the vaulted ceilings. "Remember," she encouraged, "the story behind your brushstroke matters more than perfection." Her words carried both authority and compassion, shaping not only art but character. Ethan watched, captivated by the ease and authenticity she brought to every interaction, realizing again how her presence had become a cornerstone in his own life. They paused together at the center of the hall, looking out over the courtyard where sunlight highlighted newly planted gardens, a living metaphor for growth, resilience, and patience. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Clara asked, her voice contemplative yet light. Ethan nodded, a small and reflective smile playing on his lips. "Every scar, every hesitation, they've led us here. It's not just about restoring a building, it's about restoring hope, creativity, and connection." The young artists, oblivious to the private moments shared by Ethan and Clara, continued to work with quiet fervor. Some paused to glance at the founders, their expressions a mixture of admiration and inspiration. In these interactions, Ethan felt the subtle weaving of legacy. His achievements had once been solitary, impressive but isolated. Now, through partnership and purpose, they were multiplied, tangible in the lives he and Clara touched. Later, as the day waned and sunlight softened into golden hues, Ethan and Clara found a quiet terrace overlooking the estate's rolling grounds. The sounds of creativity inside filtered softly through open windows, a gentle reminder of the living impact of their journey. "I never imagined fulfillment could feel like this," Ethan admitted, his gaze steady on Clara. "Love, purpose, all in one space. It's more than I thought possible." Clara leaned into him, the weight of shared experience grounding them both. "And it's ours," she whispered, her tone a promise and a reflection. "Every challenge we faced, every risk we took, it built this. And now we get to watch it grow, not just for us, but for everyone who comes through these doors." Their hands intertwined. They stood quietly, absorbing the moment, the culmination of love, healing, and purpose interwoven seamlessly. As evening descended, the estate glowed from within, the warm lamplight spilling through the windows onto the cobblestone paths. Outside, the sky shifted from amber to deep indigo, stars beginning to pierce the twilight, as if marking the continuity of the dreams housed within. Ethan and Clara walked among the young artists one final time before the day's close, their presence offering a gentle blessing, a silent assurance that the sanctuary they had built was a place for growth, expression, and shared humanity. The audience, if present in this moment, would feel the sweep of contentment and hope, a story of love that transcended past pain, a partnership that merged hearts and purpose, and a legacy now alive in the laughter and creativity of others. It was a moment of quiet triumph, leaving the heart full, the mind inspired, and the spirit aware that beginnings and fulfillment are often inseparable. The final note lingered, a soft, unspoken promise of countless tomorrows brimming with possibility. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, between the cracks of ordinary moments and the courage to show up despite fear. Ethan and Clara's story reminds us that even the most carefully constructed lives can carry quiet loneliness, and that connection often comes from the most unexpected encounters. A glance, a shared smile, or a whispered confession can shift the rhythm of a heart and open doors long thought closed. Love, in its truest form, is not just about passion or timing. It is about seeing the depth of another person and choosing to meet it with understanding and patience. It teaches us that vulnerability is not weakness, but a bridge to intimacy and trust. Through their journey, we witness how two souls, each carrying scars, can find purpose, joy, and even laughter together. And sometimes, what we seek is not just a partner, but a shared vision, a reason to build, to create, to leave something meaningful behind. In their story, hope and love intertwine, reminding us that life's richest moments often arrive quietly, unexpectedly, and leave us quietly, profoundly changed. Take a breath, let your heart linger there for a moment, and remember, it's never too late to step toward love, toward healing, and toward the life you've been waiting for. Thank you for being here with us. Every like, share, and subscribe helps us tell more stories that touch the soul. Your support spreads kindness, inspires connection, and reminds us all that even small gestures can make a big difference. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for taking this journey with us and for helping us keep these stories alive.